This is capitalism versus socialism. I've heard your argument, morally speaking. They make their money off of exploiting those at the bottom of the economy. To me, that's nonsensically outrageous and immoral. If we're comparing two economic systems, one that says, all right, we have to place priority, we have to determine what we value as a society, education, healthcare, or one that says we have to determine what we value as a society, the ability for the wealthiest people in the world to get wealthier at the expense of others. It sounds to me like that's what you're advocating. Privatized schools.
I'd like to know how the wealthiest people in the world get wealthy at the expense of poor people who have no money in the first place, particularly when you see that statistically, literally half the world's population has been raised out of poverty since 1980, specifically because of free markets, capitalism, and private property rights. Yeah, well, this is the problem with the alt-right and the right wing today. It's this autistic view of the world, and that, you know, if you have an iPhone, fine, you don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Technology's got, like I'm saying, that's not what really matters. I'm talking about people, you know, get out in the street, right? Talk with these people, see how people are living in the United States. I don't think you understand the point. It's not about how much money the poor have. I'm not saying that the rich are mugging them in an alleyway. They're not getting rich off of the poor's money. They're getting rich off of exploiting their labor. Right? This is because the rich own the means, since the Industrial Revolution, they own the means of production. So we don't want that to go to the government, but we want it to be in the hands of a few people who get billion-dollar bonuses, while the poor can't even get a living wage of $15 an hour. These same people lobby the government to make sure they make $7 an hour less. The poorest people on planet Earth live in one of two systems. Either a system that does not guarantee private property ownership because there is no actual governmental system to guarantee private property ownership, or two, a system where private property ownership does not exist and the government owns the means of production and does not operate in even state capitalistic fashion, but operates for the quote-unquote good of the workers. When that happens, poor people emerge. This is what's happened in Venezuela, that's what happened in the USSR, it's what happened in Cuba, it's what happened in North Korea, or alternatively, it's what happened in places like Somalia or Sudan. So again, the idea that rich people are somehow exploiting labor, unless you can show how they're doing so by pointing a gun at somebody or using another government gun to point at somebody. Free alienation of labor is a fundamental human right. Your decision to work for a given wage is your decision, and no one's forcing you into it.
Oh, come on.
Nobody's forcing you into it.
Again, it goes back to this. It's this simplistic, reductive, on the spectrum view of how the world works. We're not just talking about how much money people have in their pocket. We're talking about a system right now that doesn't, frankly, allow poor people to become the next Polk brother or the Walton family. The Walmart is probably one of the biggest recipients of welfare in the country because they don't even pay their people a living wage. See, I mean, what we're talking about capitalism, it's totally cool to bail out banks. It's totally cool to make sure that oil companies get subsidies. But once we cross the line into education, that's where we draw the line, and you're on your own,
bro.
That's
not capitalism. That's not capitalism. Subsidies to Walmart is not capitalism. That's state-sponsored mercantilism, essentially. It's really closer to economic fascism. I agree that Walmart would be actually forced by the labor market to pay its workers more if you did not have the government picking up the food stamps on the other end. That is a supplementation of wages by the federal government toward businesses like Walmart. I don't believe that big businesses should be receiving subsidies from the federal government any more than I believe that individuals generally should be receiving subsidies from government.
So, okay. So if welfare just didn't exist, if EBT cards just didn't exist, Walmart would pay $15 an hour. Is that a fact, Mr. Meta Economist?
Well, right. they would, in fact, have to raise their wages because people cannot work for a non-living wage or they would be dead by definition.
Do you think Walmart cares if you die in a gutter? Think Walmart gives rats? They don't care.
If they can't get you to work, I mean, if they got no one to stock the shelves because you're dead in the gutter, I do think Walmart cares.
Yeah, I don't think they care. I think they automate, and this is a problem we see now with new technology. Listen, there aren't the same kind of jobs for people. Not everyone's going to be a Harvard lawyer. Not everyone's going to be a Harvard lawyer's wife/doctor, right? Some people actually have to go out there and work on the assembly line and make the nice things that you enjoy, but that becomes automated, and these people get left behind, right? That's a problem.
We have 7 million unfilled jobs in the United States right now. 7 million unfilled jobs in the United States right now, and essentially record low unemployment. So I'm failing to see the millions of people who are desperately missing a job other than folks who probably should move out of communities where factories died 25 years ago.
Oh, yeah. So that's their solution. Just, hey, move. It's not my problem.
Pretty much.
Really?
Yep. Well, no, the fact is that America was built by people who are moving.
Even if we're talking about natural gas, if we're talking about coal, any of these, it still is a finite resource, right? Capitalism does not have there's no moral imperative to move to something that's renewable if something that is a more toxic alternative. Let's not say horrible for the environment. Let's go with what you say, right? And say, okay, fracking's better than the typical kind of extraction methods for. All right, listen, let's give you that. It's still a finite resource. There's no profit motive to move to something more healthful for the environment until it runs out.
Well, I mean, there has been a profit motive to move to more helpful technologies for the environment, considering the significantly higher gas mileage that we get now than we used to in the 1970s. So what was the profit motive there? Presumably,
government
it was generating more
subsidies,
efficient vehicles that use less fuel.
No, it's government subsidies. The same thing that the conservatives, the alt-right, they complain about Tesla, government subsidies. The government stepped in and offered incentives for more fuel-efficient cars. That's why.
It was not mere subsidies alone. It was also the fact that there was high demand as oil prices rose for smaller vehicles. When oil prices go down, there's less demand for smaller vehicles. When oil prices go up, there's more demand for smaller vehicles. Also, the left has been complaining about the idea of peak oil for some decades now, and we've not yet reached peak oil. Plus, with regard to technological development, would I love to see whoever cracks the code on renewable cheap energy is going to make more money than anyone in the history of humankind. The big problem here is that solar is simply not capable of generating the amounts of energy necessary to power entire civilizations. And carbon-based fuel is the most efficient source of energy.
Hold on a second. Ring, ring. Angela Merkel. Oh, it's for you. She says that's bullshit.
Okay, so, all right. I've
Germany, bro. They've been using solar and wind for years. They move their entire energy dependence to renewable resources.
Well, Germany is taking enormous amounts of actual gasoline and natural gas from Iran, so that's not completely true.
They've converted all of their energy, all of their national energy to solar or wind. Germany. I mean, isn't that a good I took government intervention, right? I know it's not the military. I know it's not the police force, right? We're on board with that. But
I'll be honest with you. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Turden. I don't know that much about the German energy situation, so I will have to check that out and get back to you.
Oh, shocker. Yeah, shocker. Benjamin Shapiro avoids learning about Germany and their current affairs. Well, some of this, though, obviously, right, is sort of self-serving. Recently, you did a video, I want to make sure I understand, on Pinterest, and it got removed. I know you got really upset about that. Can you explain that to people who don't know? You did a video on Pinterest, sort of making some accusations, and I think you doxed somebody, and it was removed, and you were mad.
Yeah, and this is probably the perfect example of why any kind of restrictions on speech, particularly when they say it's hate speech, is so insidious. I did a video commenting on publicly available information. But because the story was damaging to this massive billion-dollar corporation, apparently, this is my understanding, right? So this is where we're at so far in the story. I haven't reported this yet, but it seems like a legal firm filed a privacy complaint, and YouTube just takes the content down, even though it's public. So this is a massive legal firm with probably hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions, I don't know, getting journalism taken down by lying, essentially, or putting pressure on YouTube.
And to be clear, for people who don't know, this information was made public by James O'Keefe, so they can check the sources for themselves.
Right. So James O'Keefe does an expose, and he
let's call it that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. You don't have to like the guy, but he had a whistleblower on the record. And if you don't want to trust James, you can trust the guy who did get fired from Pinterest saying this happened. Okay. Now, if you want to argue that journalism violates someone's privacy, I think you're wrong. But James O'Keefe did publish someone's name. I still think James O'Keefe is in the right on that issue. But then it gets even crazier when I'm simply commenting on what everyone already knows, and they still say you cannot do that. Now you have massive unaccountable companies, like no one elected Pinterest to determine what beliefs you're allowed to have, but they are suppressing information. And once people found out, because regulation is coming, Pinterest then acts in the interest, or I should say YouTube and these other platforms, because even Twitter took down James O'Keefe's videos. They're protecting each other as far as I'm concerned, because they know regulation is going to be bad for their bottom dollar.
That's the key there, is as far as, I want to make sure people understand, as far as Tim Pool is concerned. Let me ask you this. I know you say that you're more moderate left, but you just mentioned, James O'Keefe and Pinterest, and obviously you've defended Stephen Crowder with the Carlos Maza conflict. Do you ever worry you're on the wrong side of history because you're consistently siding with and defending bullies? Does that ever occur to you?
But I've made several videos in the past several weeks defending the left. I made a video yesterday defending an anti-fascist who was suspended from Twitter because his book had KKK heads on it. So I'll tell you what happens. People like you, Skyler, only ever watch the videos that are supporting the speech of people you don't like, and you ignore it when I make videos defending the speech of people on your side because it's not sensational enough for you.
Well, I have to be honest, I'm not super familiar with your videos. It doesn't show up in my suggested feed.
That's probably true too.
Yeah. So I don't listen. I haven't seen all of your videos, but if you say that, I'll take your word for it. And
I'll tell you what's really funny is this author who got suspended from Twitter, which he shouldn't have because of his book cover, starts ragging on me when he's complaining about it. I defended the guy. So I'll tell you what, man. I'm going to defend speech. I defended flag burning. Right. My principles are where they lie. It doesn't matter. I don't, in fact, I find myself more likely to agree with the speech of people who are moderate left. I think there's a lot of people way too far to the left than I would a conservative. But the issue is it's obvious. Well, then first they come for you, then they come for me.
Well, then why would you defend someone like a Stephen Crowder, right? With a smaller guy like Carlos Maza and he had less than 100,000 followers. That's a clear example of Crowder obviously had violated terms of service by making hateful content, which YouTube said, and a big channel with almost 4 million subscribers going after a lifelong LGBTQ advocate. How is that not a prime example of
Well,
bullying?
First, YouTube said Stephen didn't break any rules.
Well, they demonetized him, so
they did, right? And because he caused, in their view, they said it was harmful to the community. But here's the bigger problem: would you prefer it if Carlos Maza was banned from Twitter and YouTube? Is that what you're advocating for? Because Carlos Maza has repeatedly done the exact same thing. In fact, one of the big problems is, first of all, I understand comedy, right? I'm a big fan of George Carlin, and George Carlin he had this bit in the early 90s where he used every racial slur in the book and said, it's not the words, it's the person behind the words you've got to be worried about. And the reason why that's so important is that Carlos Maza used those words on himself. If we held everyone to the same standard, Carlos Maza would have been banned from YouTube way before Stephen Crowder ever got to the point of criticizing him.
Well, no. That's a false equivalency. If we're going to use George Carlin's example, it would be, it's the person behind them. It's just like it's not the same for a black person to reappropriate the N-word versus a white person calling them that. Carlos Maza can use those words. Someone like Stephen Crowder, he was using it clearly in a derogatory way. It's the person who is not an ally.
So you agree with George Carlin's position on it, that it's the person behind it and the intent, the context that matters. Context is what's important, right?
Yes, context, and of course the context is problematic when you see that someone like Stephen Crowder clearly violated guidelines and it was harassing content.
Well, if you agree that the context is relevant, then we're talking about a comedian who's describing a person the way they describe themselves. And what's really important here is because this is a common tactic we see from activists like Carlos Maza, interestingly, who repeatedly has called for various people to be taken down. You know that Carlos Maza, this is a screenshot, so I haven't confirmed this, but apparently he referred to gay men as ghouls, like in an absolutely derogatory way. So if we're gonna take him at his word, and that's how he describes people, then I don't trust him when he describes himself that it's supposed to be in jest or reappropriating the language. It shouldn't matter. Back to the point, because I kind of derailed, these activists, what they've done with Crowder is they've gone through 2 years worth of content and snipped together all of these out of context times he said certain things. But YouTube realized when you watch the full segment, it was a passing moment and it wasn't targeting Carlos specifically based on those traits. It was just him talking about something and then mentioning the identity of Maza. By all means, you can be mad at Crowder for doing that. I'm willing to listen to your opinion. But we go back and look at what Carlos Maza is saying, throw milkshakes at people. And he actually, and again, I want to clarify, I didn't confirm this tweet yet, but it's going around now because Maza has repeatedly referred to various minorities.
Seems like there's a lot of that in your content, if I may say, a lot of unconfirmed screenshots and tweets. But, listen,
No, that's actually not true at all.
No.
maybe less than.
I would
1%.
say agree to disagree, but only if there was even a slight chance that I was incorrect, which we know is not the case here.
You are, yeah, because I actually use NewsGuard, which is a third-party rating agency I actually have great disagreements with, but I use it on purpose as a check on my own personal bias. So yes, everything I use is confirmed.
I'm not as familiar with NewsGuard. I tend to reference Vice and Vox quite a bit. Let me ask you.
I was the founding member of Vice News, so you'll probably trust me in that regard, right?
No, well, good for you. Where are you? You're not working for them anymore, I guess, right? No, we can revisit. Let's circle back to that. Maybe we can do a shallow dive, because that seems about where we're going here. If I were to walk into your house right now and harass you and call you all sorts of names and get right up in your face and not leave after you've asked me to leave and continue harassing you without any refuge for you, would you think that is a crime for me to do that?
I don't know why you're asking the question. So
well, let me tell you why I'm asking. So now, again, this is why we're talking about the Constitution and guns. Now we have fully automatic AR-15s, and things change, right? Times change. We need to adapt, and we've both agreed on that to some extent. Now, online, people like Alex Jones, they have the ability to invade your house digitally, continually, and harass and berate.
You can always shut it off.
Not necessarily. That's the thing. You can't shut off everything. You can't block people. You can't mute people on every platform. Then they can have your email on YouTube. You know, it shows up in your suggested feed. The point is, especially. No,
that's a silly argument. You can just shut the whole thing off if you want. So it's a silly argument. It's not like someone invading your house. So because you can shut it off at any time.
Okay.
No, that's just not going anywhere, that argument.
Well, what if someone has a computer in their house then? If they have a computer in their house, then it means that someone can invade their house that way digitally. There's no way to find a space away from these, particularly people like Alex Jones, most egregious offenders, right, who spread conspiracies and effectively lead to doxing of people. I mean, that's just.
Well, a lot of this, the thing is too, it's again, the question is more fundamental. Let's assume that it's a bad idea for poorly supported conspiracy theories to be formulated and distributed.
Yeah, let's assume that.
Yeah, fine. Well, we don't need to put it in air quotes. We could probably both assume it. The question is, what should you do with people who are doing that? And the one answer is, well, do what you can to silence them and drive them underground. The other is, let them talk and let people make up their own minds. And my sense is that people are wise enough to listen to people of that sort and decide that that's too extreme. Now, not everyone, because conspiracy theorists can find followers among people who are disagreeable and somewhat paranoid, but it's best for everyone, including the conspiracy theorists themselves, that those things are aired in public discussion, because it helps keep people sane. You know, like I've known people who are a little bit on this.
I disagree.
Yeah, but that's because you don't know what you're talking about.
Does it ever concern you that you might be on the wrong side of history?
What mostly concerns me is whether I make a mistake when I'm talking, and so I'm not thinking about the wrong side of history precisely. So does it concern me that I might be making mistakes? That concerns me all the time. But I thought the things that I say through very carefully, and you know, I'm perfectly willing to live or die by them, let's say. So.
Well, I ask you that because, you know, we've gone through a litany of you know, using people's preferred pronouns, the idea of compassion, neither of which do you support, and then we've gone through things like Alex Jones and extremists in social media, and these are ideas that I wonder if you constantly finding yourself defending just bad people, and even if you're not one, if you have
mostly what I find myself doing is being supported by a very large number of people, and being, what would you call, put on the spot in various uncomfortable ways by a tiny, noisy minority of radical collectivists. So that's mostly what I feel, or mostly what I experience. Isn't it wrong side of history.
Isn't it your buddy Shapiro who says facts don't care about your feelings? So if that's how you feel, I'm sorry, that's not my intent here. But again, that is selfauthoring.com, 12 rules for life.
I hate to say it, but you guys, the progressives, you've become a secular religion, and if anyone doesn't agree with you all the time, they must be destroyed.
I don't consider myself a secularist or a member of any religion at all.
You're not a secularist or a member of a religion?
No, I'm
so
a
you're
pagan.
Like,
I want to make sure that, so you believe that conservatives are more decent because they want to live in a world where they can yell the N-word or yell the F-word? By the way, I want to be clear, not they want to yell like the F, like a pejorative toward people from your marginalized group. You believe they're more decent because they believe in defending that right. I want to make sure I'm not misrepresenting you here.
No, well, first I should be clear. I am in no way marginalized. I am a human being with equal rights that you have, and that I would imagine virtually everyone you know has. But yes, I do want to live in a society where you're allowed to say whatever you want. Offense is on the side of the people who take it. So if you were walking down the street, let's say, and someone said, "Oh God, look at that guy with his what do you call a beanie again?"
Toque.
A toque, and that ridiculous mustache,
Toque.
and his
You're over-enunciating the U. Toque.
Toque.
Yeah.
And his
Close
lesbian-like shirt and all of that, and someone said some mean things to you, well, it's on you to decide whether you're going to take offense to that. But the option, let's say you said, okay, I'm not okay with someone being all right, saying whatever they want to say. The option is we're going to start jailing people for speech. Now, of course, this is actually bizarrely where the left wants to go with this, which is why they label everyone Nazis, because why would you let a Nazi speak? So we're in a slippery slope here, and
I appreciate that Mr. Exchange of Ideas went straight to ad hominem. This is not a lesbian shirt. I purchased it at Orvis. There happen to be lesbians who shop there. But I consider myself an ally, and it's a beautiful experience, and sometimes we shop together, so I don't necessarily know how that's relevant to my ideas. But I would like to ask you this, as you mentioned society sort of collectively, if we can agree to the same values, and then I'll express my view, but this is collectivism that you're advocating. What would you like to see? How would you like to see society go forward? Since I know you've railed against deplatforming, cancel culture, how would you like to see the current state of our discourse improved? What would you change about quote-unquote cancel culture, and how would that look?
Yeah, well, just to be clear, Skyler, I am not advocating for collectivism. I'm advocating for what the founders wanted, which is that we have God-given rights that the government is there to protect. The government doesn't give us rights; it can protect those God-given rights, and then those rights are laid out in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. What I'd like to see going forward is more people, more good, decent progressives like yourself willing to talk about these issues. Clearly, the vape is helping you sort of, take a more open approach to this. And I think what's happened, unfortunately, is that most progressive these days, they believe that they, in and of themselves, that their own mind knows exactly what's right, and that everything that came before them was bigoted and racist and awful, and they're going to have to hate their grandparents, and they're going to have to hate Barack Obama one day because he ran against gay marriage the first time, and a whole bunch of other things. So I hope that the progressives will take a moment and pull us back from the ledge, because I believe that most people that live here in these United States of America are pretty decent. And by the way, my dog Emma, who's been here this whole time, she's been very quiet. She agrees with me too. It's not such a terrible place here, the good old U.S. of A.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing Emma into the conversation. I did realize after our last couple of conversations here on Devil's Advocate that we do need more equal representation of our sisters, of course, in the good fight right now. I would say this.
Emma identifies as a cat, by the way.
I can't, in good conscience, tell a woman that it's in her best interest to have an abortion, not when all the data out there says that by her having an abortion, she will not do well emotionally, she will suffer great trauma, and that she will essentially be having to heal from yet another traumatic incident in her life. So, I mean, if I'm a person who says I'm really going to support women, I don't want to support them being re-traumatized by abortion after something as heinous as rape.
Well, we can both agree it's heinous. So if you're saying that the outcomes are better for women who are raped to carry the child, sounds to me like, well, why stop rape? I mean, they're doing better by your logic, right? They're doing better if they're raped to have a baby. So what's the difference?
Well, I don't think they're doing better than women who haven't been raped.
Oh, you're just saying they're doing better than women who've been raped and have abortions performed?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd be curious to see that data. Here's something that's important to me. What's the difference, for example? Let's do a thought exercise. This baby, All right, this fetus, this zygote, is entirely dependent on the mother. Right, there's no possible chance at viability. So, what's the difference between, let's say, a mother not properly caring for the baby, not properly, let's say, maybe she's malnourished, or she doesn't take prenatal vitamins, right? Is that considered, at that point, would that be considered murder in your eyes? Because the idea here is, listen, this baby is completely dependent on the mother. It's not a viable human being outside of the womb. So again, it comes to this idea of forcing women to take care of effectively what is a parasite.
I think we have to look at it a different way. I think we want women to take care of themselves. So if a woman is malnourished, then we need to look at what's happening in her life, because that's not only affecting the life of her baby, but that's affecting her life. So I'm not really sure, even in the end, what that has to do with abortion, because if a woman is not eating, if she's starving to death, then we want to make sure that we are taking care of her, and that will in turn take care of her child.
Right, but the point here is we're kind of getting to the argument of viability. That baby is not viable without the mother. So, where does the government?
My baby can't. I have a 12-week-old, and I can tell you, he can't live without me either.
Well, he can breathe on his own, right? Of course, he needs to be cared for. But there's a difference between that and actual viability, the ability to survive merely outside of the womb. Basic primary functions, central nervous system, the ability to breathe, developed lungs. That's not the case with these zygotes to which you're referring. Does that not enter into the equation at all, viability, to define a human being, or at least as it relates to rights? I mean, the mother who is viable, should her rights not matter at that point? Even though she's a viable human being on her own, she has to take care of an unviable human being because Abby Johnson says so?
Well, I mean, viability is not really that important to me. I mean, it either is an innocent human life or it's not. And whether it's viable or not, I mean, that's sort of a moot point. We have a responsibility to take care of humans that are in our care. I have a responsibility to take care of my 8 children. I have a responsibility to care for my children when they are in the womb. And viability really is it's so subjective, because as medical science continues to advance, viability, the weeks that determine viability continue to decrease. So, even 30 years ago, a baby that was born at 30 weeks gestation would have a very, very difficult time surviving at 30 weeks. Now we've got babies being born alive at 21, 22 weeks that are surviving outside of the womb. So we can't really dictate what's moral or immoral based on medical science that continues to advance.
Well, I do think it has somewhat of an effect. Let's do another thought experiment here. Let's say there were a fire at a fertility clinic, right? And you could rescue a kid in the waiting room or a bunch of test tube embryos.
Sure.
So would you rescue the test tubes or would you rescue the child first?
Well, these sort of hypothetical situations are really cute. And they're
I don't think they're cute. They're not meant to do anything. I was trying to say, what are you saying that
they're meant
there's an
to
equivalency?
Create an emotional reaction. I get that, but
I get that you're not answering. I get that you're not answering the question. So you would save the tubes before the child.
Listen, take a puff on your vape. Listen to me.
Not
rescuing someone.
I don't like what I'm hearing, but I will.
Yeah, sure. It's not the same as directly killing them. Okay, so there's really a false equivalence there. So here's a thought experiment for you, Skyler. So let's say there was a fire, and you had to choose between saving your own child, which I doubt you have, but let's pretend that you do, and saving a black child that's not yours. Which one would you save?
Well, first off, you know what they say about assumptions. It makes an ass out of you and me. But in this case, just you, because I would save the black child first.
Listen, hey. Make sure you check your shoes and or gloves if they've been around any dead foliage or dry wood piles. Don't even make a joke about it. Just brown recluse is nothing to mess with.